Okay, 2.4 complex numbers and operations. We're going to be working on those today and tomorrow. We'll have part of the notes today, part of the notes tomorrow, just because I want to make sure you can have time to practice both of them, and unless we get through all of them today, I guess, and then you have 1 through 60 odd, and then even. I don't know.
So we have what?
There's 60 problems on the worksheet. You have not. You only have. Never mind. Just quit panicking. Okay. Solve the quadratic equation using the square root. How can you use the square root to solve? So I said solve, yes? So we set it equal to 0 over here. Then how would I solve that? Would I add 16? Yeah. So x squared equals 16. And then I would, to get rid of a square, I take what? What's that? Square root. So I square root both sides. So I get x equals plus or minus 4. What's 4? Negative 4 times negative 4? 16. What's 4 times 4? 16. So could it be either one of those? Yes.
Okay.
So when I choose to put a square root in my problem, I have to put positive, negative, and 4 in there. Okay? They may not always be both answers, but I have to put them there. So that's the square root method. So x squared equals negative 9. So what should I do? Take the square root of it.
Yeah, so would it just be plus or minus?
No, it would just be negative 3.
No, wait a second. Can I take the square? Stop and think about what you're saying.
You can't take a square root of minus and then parentheses 3.
It would just be the
It
square
has
root
to
of
be a
negative
negative
9.
and a positive.
No, it would just be x equals the square
What
root
is
of
wrong with
negative
what
9.
I'm taking the square root of?
It's
Negative.
It's not a perfect
It's a
square.
negative.
It's a negative.
Oh, yeah.
Okay? It's a perfect square, but it's a negative. Can I take a number and square it and get a negative number?
No.
No. Okay?
Wait.
So until today, you have said no solution.
Oh, is this? Do we have to do something?
Just-
where it's just a negative on the outside?
No.
Oh.
Okay. Until today, you've been told that is no solution. That is not correct. Okay? The solution to the equation x squared equals negative 9 is not a real solution, but is called a complex number. The number square root of negative 1 is called an imaginary unit, I. It's really small up there. So you don't need to write that down here. I'm going to show up here what we do. So what we have here is x squared equals negative 1 times 9, don't we? Yeah? Okay. So now I'm going to take the square root. And remember, when it's multiplied, I can take the square root of each thing, correct? Yes? So I get x equals, and we have plus or minus, yes. What's the square root of 9? 3. What did I just tell you the square root of negative 1 was? I. Okay, the reason why we have this is, don't you think in math sometimes we come out with the square root of a negative number when we start getting into big equations? Yes. And they started getting into these square roots of negative numbers a lot when electricity started being manipulated and trying to think of how we can carry it from one place to the other and working with transformers. This square root of a negative number kept running around. And so they'd have to carry the square root of negative 600,000 whatever around with them until it worked its way out. Well, so they came up with a unit called I that represents the square root of what? Negative 1. So then they could just carry around an I rather than some obnoxious square root. Because we all know if we start having to carry some big, huge thing around, are we going to mess it up once in a while?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So we're going to be working with imaginary numbers now, the I. And this is where they come from. You used to have the advantage of saying no solution. Now you don't have the advantage of saying no solution. You have to find the solution. Yes.
Well, will our homework today just be this, or will it be both complex and then just the first one we did. Where
I think today is just complex, but after this 2 days, anything that happens, you just have to know there's an I there. It will just pop up randomly.
Well, I didn't know like if the homework was like both A and B or just B.
No, I think it's supposed to be.
Okay.
Yes.
So is the example like A, is that complex?
No, there's no, this isn't this is a real solution. It's a real number. This is an imaginary solution because you can't take the square root.
It was a complex.
This is a complex number. This is an imaginary solution. Okay, it's the same. A complex number has an I in it. Imaginary is something that's going to have an I in it. So, we have x squared equals -5. I have to take the what of both sides? Square root. So I'm going to have x squared, or x,
Square root of
equals plus or minus. Now,
5
what's the square root of 5?
There is no square root.
There is no perfect square, right? So I take the square root of 5, and then I put a I after it. Now, you notice my eyes are a little curvy. That one was really small. They're a little curvy. Again, I close my square root. Some people would say plus or minus I square root of 5, but that's not how a complex number should be written, and I'm going to show you that in a second here.
Could you have x equals plus -5i?
What are you asking me?
Could you have like for the answer x equals plus -5i?
No, because square root has to stay in there. Because there isn't a square root.
Then how could you do the 9 like that?
Because 9's a perfect square. Okay, now I'm going to have square root again. Yes? 72 is a compound number. Is there a perfect square in 72?
No.
9, what else?
8.
Well, 8 is 4 and 2. Yes?
Yeah.
Okay,
Oh, okay.
so
Sorry,
I have plus or minus. Yes? What's the square root of 9?
3,
3. What's the square root of 4?
2,
2. So I can bring out 3 times 2, which is
6.
6. And if we would have been smart, we would have said, oh, 36 is in there, but we aren't. That's all good.
Yeah.
And then we have left in a square root what?
2.
2. So we square root of 2. And then we get a I.
Wait, how do you get 9, 4, and 2?
Okay, because 9
70
times 8 is 72. 9 is a perfect square, but then you have to.
We did this a lot in last year in geometry. We had to simplify a square root. So if I have the square root of 72, 72 is 9 times 8, which is 9 times 4 times 2. Yes?
I would just do, I'm going to get so confused because I would just do 9 times 8. And
Well, but there's a perfect square in 8. You got to keep going.
4.
Yes. 4 is an 8. So the square root of 9 is 3. Square root of 4 is 2. And your square root of 2 is just the square root of 2. So what's 3 times 2? 6. So the square root of 72 equals 6 times the square root of 2. Okay, and then we have an I. Where'd the I come from?
Yeah, imaginary, so the negative.
The -1. You guys just told me what I should have found out earlier. Evidently tomorrow you're going to have extra problems. Because when we do the quadratic formula, we have to be able to simplify square roots. I thought it was stuck enough from last year. Good.
For what?
Are we good on this side, Carly?
Yeah.
Okay.
Is it still x equals 2?
Yes, it was x equals. Okay, so the complex number system, you don't keep an I all the time. You got to be able to work with it and get rid of it. So if we have, I always do that. I touch it before I start the pen. I've told you that the square root of -1 is I, yes? And you can leave that in a problem, but you can't leave any power of I greater than 1 in a problem once it's simplified. And this is how. So, I squared would be I times I, yes?
Yeah.
But what is I?
-1.
No, the square root of negative 1 times the square root of negative 1, which is the square root of negative 1 squared, yes? Well, what happens when you square a square root?
It would just be it times itself.
And you
Or
would get
-1.
negative 1. So I to the first is the square root of negative 1, yes? But we write I to the first. I to the second is just negative 1. So we got back from complex numbers to real numbers, didn't we? Okay. Well, I to the third is I squared times I, isn't it? Well, what was I squared? What's I squared? So I get negative 1 times I, which is just negative I. And is that to the first power? Is that to the first power? Yes. I squared is what?
Okay. -1.
Negative 1. And I, so negative 1 times I would be negative I. Yes?
Oh, yeah, okay, sorry.
That's okay. Okay, so I to the fourth would be I squared
To the third.
times I squared. Yes? 2 plus 2 is 4.
Wait, I thought the
I'm
whole
so
reason we did the
confused.
I was so that we stayed away from having the negative, like, like
What, to have the square root, we can't have the square root of a negative number. We can still have I around because we might have to, but we have to be able to simplify it as well.
the, oh.
Okay, so I squared is what?
-1.
Negative 1. And I squared is?
-1.
And negative 1 times negative 1 is? 1. So I to the fourth is 1. So what happens if I go I to the fifth?
Well, that would just be
I to the fourth
would be 1 times I,
times I.
which would just be I.
Right. So is this going to continue to happen over and over and over again?
Yeah.
So these are the ones that you should know. You really have to know that one and that one. Okay. Could we figure the rest out?
Yeah.
Yeah. But we use these. What if I put I to the 763rd and tell you to tell me an answer? So the answer would either have to be I, -1, negative I, or 1. Yes? But this repeats. This pattern repeats, doesn't it?
It'd be negative I.
So if we take this number and divide it by 4, I'm going to show you how to do this. So take that number and divide it by 4. So we're going to have I to the fourth and some power, and then it's left over. That's what we're going to do. So 4 goes into 7 how many times?
Once.
Once. With 3 left over. 4 goes into 36 how many times? 9. Does 4 go into 3? No, so that's 0 with what left over? 3. And so I to the fourth is what? 1. So we have 1 to the 190th equals, not equals, times I squared times I, don't we? Because we should know I should have put like right there. Should we know I squared is -1? Yes. Definitely after today. So what's 1 to the 190th?
1.
1. What's I squared?
-1.
-1. So we have -1 times I, which is,
-1.
so negative I.
Yeah.
So this right here, all we had to do is get a power, we had to divide it by 4 and get your remainder, didn't we? Because 1 times anything is just going to be itself, so we just need its remainder. So that's the way that they like to put nice questions on the ACT, and they ask you to simplify something like I to the 898th. That should be an I, not a 7. and they ask you what it is. And then people sit there and try to mess with it. All you have to do is divide it by what? 4?
How am I gonna take the ACT if I'm still learning stuff?
Same way everybody else does when they take the ACT.
I know
You
everything.
do what you know.
About half of them have been through algebra.
Okay, so an imaginary number is BI. It has what in it? No. What does an imaginary number have in it? I. Okay. Where B is a non-zero real number and I equals the square root of -1. An imaginary number has an imaginary number in it, which is what? I. Got me? Okay, a complex number has a real part and an imaginary part. When we write our imaginary numbers, I should always be at the back. Always. It should always be by itself. So, examples of imaginary, well, we have -6 plus 4i. That is a complex number. It's complex because it has two parts. It has a real part and a what? Imaginary part. 7 minus I square root of 2. That is a complex number, but is it written correctly? Nope. It should be 7 minus square root of 2i. You need to devise some way of knowing that I is not in the square root. I will tell you if I'm working in a problem with an I will put it in front of the square root, but when I write my final answer, where should it always be? The back. And I put it at the front so I don't miss it. This last is not a complex number. It is just an imaginary number. Why is it not a complex number? It doesn't have a real part. And I'm going to keep pushing that. Complex numbers have real and imaginary parts. That is the definition. Now I could write 4 as a complex number. You know how? 4 plus 0i. Is it a complex number now?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I don't know why you would, but is it a complex number?
Why can't it
Yeah.
just be 4i?
Well, because I would mean there's one of them, and there's not one. There's none. Yes?
So you'd be 4.
Because if I just have 4, just 4, if you said why can't it be 4i, right?
Yeah.
Well, what does I mean? Square root of -1, and you can't just put that into a problem, can you? So by me putting 0, I didn't change the problem, did I? I just wrote it as a complex number. So these are just technical parts. It's not even really what you're going to be doing today. This is all background stuff. Well, you are going to be doing it, but not. Okay, so when you add and subtract complex numbers, you add real parts and you add and subtract real parts and you add and subtract imaginary parts. That's what you do. It's like combining like terms. So what is the sum of 4 minus 7i and -11 plus 9i? So 4, darn it, 4 minus 7i plus -11 plus 9i. So the real parts are what?
4 and 11.
4 and -11. So what do I get? -7. And the imaginary parts are?
-7 and 9.
And what do I get?
2.
So 2i. Is that not just like doing combining like terms?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So what is the difference? So what's difference mean? Subtract. So 6 plus 8i minus 2 minus 5i. So I'm going to combine like terms, but there's something I got to do first. What do I have to do with that negative? What's a negative in front of a quantity say I have to do? Distribute. So it's going to be 6 plus 8i minus 2 plus 5i. So what's my real part?
6 minus 2 is 4,
So 4
and 13i.
plus 13i. You guys want to do the next two on your own?
Yeah.
Okay.
If you have two negatives, isn't it a positive?
If you're multiplying. Tyson, are you trying them on your own? Have you got them both done?
Don't know.
Tyson, the very first one, negative 4 plus 6i plus negative 2 minus 9i. What are my real parts? What are my the two real numbers in that problem?
4 and 6. I don't know.
Negative 4 and negative 2. They're real. They don't have an imaginary part.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so negative 4, negative 2 is what? I have negative 4 minus 2.
Negative 6.
Negative 6.
Yeah.
Okay? And then this is imaginary and this is imaginary, yes?
Yeah.
So you have positive 6 and negative 9. What do you got?
Negative 3. I mean,
Negative 3. I.
yeah.
It's just like if I put an X there, guys. It's exactly like if I put an X there, but except X, you don't know the value. Do I know the value of I?
Yes.
What is the value of I? Square root of negative 1. So the next one, you distributed the negative and got a positive 4 and a negative 1, right?
Yeah.
And you should get, what, 7 minus 3i?
That's all we got to do.
Yes,
And you just told me that.
I did.
It was way harder when we first started. Will we have those too? Like these.
That's just getting your head around what you're doing.
So this is what we'll be doing.
Yes,
on
but
our homework.
tomorrow you'll have plenty of the other, though, because you guys needed it.
What was the answer for that?
Oh, well, here we go. I've got
Seven
it.
minus
I
3i.
dropped out.
Plus, okay, you guys stop. Plus, minus, and what's 3 plus 4?
7.
7. And negative 2 and negative 1 is
I.
negative 2 and negative 1.
Minus. How is that negative?
Okay. So, what does this tell me to do? I touched the screen.
Matt does not say
To distribute.
To distribute. So, guess what you're going to do?
Distribute.
Distribute. So, I'm going to take negative 2.5, and I touched it again.
Don't touch it.
Negative 2.5 times 8. Yes?
Yeah.
So, half of 8 is what?
4,
4. 2 times 8 is
16,
plus 4,
20.
20. And it's going to be negative 20i.
What?
Oh,
I just did 2.5.
easy.
What's half of 8? 4.
Negative, okay.
Yeah. And then 2 times 8 is?
Can we just do 2.5 times 8?
Sure, you're still going to get 20. I was trying to show you how to do it easier.
Yeah, Carly.
I will not.
Okay, so 2.5 times 8 is negative 20i. Yes? So a negative times a negative for the 9 is what? A positive.
Positive.
Now, 9's not an even number, so I do have to multiply it out, yes? So 9 times 5 is 45. Carry a 4. 18 plus 4 is 22. So 22.5. And I times I would be I what?
Square.
Squared. What is I squared?
Yeah.
-1.
It's -1, yes? So this says 22.5 times I squared, which was what? So times -1 now, which it doesn't make it a positive, it makes it a negative, and we need to bring it in the front. So it's going to be 22.5 minus 20i. Oh, yes. Yes. Because this negative right here, correct?
Correct.
You want to go down or across?
Down.
Down.
Okay.
Across down.
So we're going to take, well, does 5 go into 10? How many times? 2. And 2 times 2 is? 4. So I have 4i. Yes? What do you mean, sure?
I don't know.
You just
Does 5 go into 10?
Yeah,
How many times?
2.
2. And 2 times that 2. Okay, well then don't say I guess. Plus,
I'm guessing.
okay, what's 2/5 times 5/2? 1. But I times I is
I squared.
I squared. Well, what is I squared?
-1.
If this equals -1, right?
Yeah.
So it has to be -1 plus 4i.
Oh, yeah. Because you
'Kay.
did that.
Can I put it like this?
No.
No, that's not in standard form. That's a no. Well, I didn't tell you to go away.
Don't click it. That's Nick. What are you doing?
It just went.
Miss.
Clicking it. I was writing that down.
Okay, so what we had, -1 plus 4i? Is that the answer?
Yes.
Okay. So what am I going to do on this one?
Distribute.
Distribute. So distribute.
Oh no.
You know how to distribute.
I forgot.
Not with fractions.
There is no fraction.
I thought we were on the second one.
We already did the second one. We're done.
I thought there were more steps to it.
Nope. A fraction's just a number. Do I need to beat you guys up with some more fraction stuff?
Yes.
No. More points. Alright.
It's not that many more
Fractions
points,
aren't
guys.
that-
I know, I only got 1 point for homework. All the homework I did. 1 point.
Did you not do your homework?
No, I did.
BS, Tyson.
I didn't do one I Excel because I was super.
Okay, can we focus on what we're supposed to be doing, please?
I'm focused.
Multiply that out. Carly, you got it multiplied out?
No.
Just multiply it out. I will help you simplify it. I just want you to multiply it out.
Whoa.
Mm-hmm. Okay, did you get 9 plus 6i minus 6i minus 4i squared?
Yes.
Okay, so plus 6i minus 6i, what? It cancels out, it zeros. So I have 9 minus 4 times what? -1, because I squared equals what? And -4 times -1 is? So 9 plus 4 is 13. These are difference of squares. They're called conjugate pairs. They're amazing. We're going to use them a bunch tomorrow.
That doesn't seem like that.
But what happened? When I was done, what did I have? I had a real number, don't I? That's what they're for. Conjugate pairs are for giving us real numbers. Okay, so what should happen on this one? The same thing should happen. So 1/2 plus 2i times 1/2 minus 2i. See what you can do with that. And everybody, what is half of 2? 1. Thank you. Did you get 1/4 plus I minus 4I squared?
No,
No?
I did. No, I did
There's no
it way
1/4.
different way.
Oh, mine are opposite. Mine's
I hate
1/4
that
minus
answer.
1I plus
I hate
1I.
that
Yeah,
minus
it's minus 1I.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. Plus and minus. Do you have a plus or minus I in there?
Yes.
Okay. 1/2 times 1/2 is 1/4, correct? Okay. So this is 1/4 minus 4 times what? -1. So it's going to be positive 4. So it's going to be 1/4
4,
plus
4.
what over 4?
17. Or well,
16
16.
over 4. So my answer is
17 over 4.
I didn't think that's correct.
I got common. This is positive 4, yes? Which would be 16/4.
Do you want it in improper form?
Yes. I don't want mixed numbers. They're pukey. So today you're mostly going to be adding, subtracting, but there is some multiplication in there, hidden in. The biggest thing to remember is what is I squared? -1. I can't just leave it like that.